Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Chats with Chaudhrey, and welcome to my Reflections and Forecasts 2023-2024 interview series, where I look back at the previous year and look ahead to the coming year with senior executives across life science, pharma, biopharma. And today, my guests are Vicki Loise, who is CEO of the Society of Lab Automation and Screening, or SLAS for short, and the new president of SLAS, Jonathan Wingfield from AstraZeneca. So, Vicki, John, how are you both?
I'm
Great.
very
How are
well,
you,
thanks.
Rizwan?
Yes.
There's always that deathly pause when you interview more than one person. No one knows who should go first. So there you go.
I was trying to be polite and let Vicky go first, but hey.
Fantastic. Well, look, happy New Year to you both. I hope you've had a good start to the year. I'm sure you're very busy already and wondering how the hell we're already getting towards the third week of January, which is quite scary. Now, thank you for joining me to talk about the last year and the coming year. So what I want to do first, if I may, and Vicky, you might want to kick this off, is just to give you as a quick overview of who SLAS are for those people not familiar with. So would you mind just give me a quick overview of SLAS and what you
Sure.
actually do?
Absolutely. So, as you said, we are the Society for Laboratory Automation and Screening. We are a global organization with about 23,000 participants in our community from around the world. And those folks are working in a wide area of science, life science, whether it's in life science research, in biology, chemistry, or providing and developing the technologies and equipment that those scientists are using in the lab.
Fantastic. Now, my first question, both of you, maybe I'll kick off with you, John, as Vicky started off this interview, is how would you describe 2023 in one word and why?
I think it was an exceptional year, if I'm honest. I think it was one of the first years that we were starting to really recover from the sort of COVID experience, right? And for me personally, I found it exceptional because it was the first opportunity I'd had to get out of the office, to go out and meet and reconnect with colleagues and scientists from around the pharma industry. That's my sector. So, and of course, taking the opportunities provided by SLAS to do that at both the main conference in San Diego and obviously the European conference in Brussels were two fantastic opportunities, and it was really rejuvenating, right? Having been restricted to get that opportunity to go out, and they were absolutely joyous conferences. The weather was terrible in California, but
Yes.
nonetheless, the excitement, that joie de vivre, that just that pure scientific energy was there, and it was an absolute joy. And I think that was also reflected in the European conference as well. Absolutely. To be honest, there was real growth there compared to the previous year when we'd met in Dublin, which was a great conference, right? It's difficult to beat a social in the Guinness Brewery, but frankly, Brussels topped, I guess, our expectations. And of course, there were other events that I was able to get out to and go and meet people and talk about science, which of course is what we're all passionate about. We're all absolutely scientists at heart. So that was a great experience. So yeah, for me, 2023 was an exceptional year. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, Vicky, what word would you use and why?
Growth. For a couple of reasons. As John just said, there was this incredible energy and excitement at both of our major conferences. There was also tremendous growth at both of those events from the standpoint of the amount of people who came, but also the breadth of science that they represented. We started seeing representatives from the forensic science world at our conferences, which we haven't seen much in the past. We see a real growth and uptick from the VC sector attending our conferences. So the conferences themselves had growth in a lot of different ways to measure that. The other place where we saw a lot of growth was in our membership. our paid membership grew by about 30% in 2023.
Right.
And we're keeping to that trend here in 2024. We're still seeing that growth happen. So there's clearly a deep interest, again, across all sorts of science sectors in the products that SLAS offers, but also that opportunity to connect with others who are working in space similar to where folks are coming from.
Brilliant. Well, this leads on quite nicely to my next question, which was really, what were some of the highlights for you from an SLAS perspective in 2023? Vicki, would you like to
For
start
me?
there?
Yeah, sure. No doubt the conference in San Diego was by far one of the best highlights we've seen. Like I said, there was that huge growth, but John hit the nail on the head. That energy, that excitement to be back together, to be able to connect with people from around the world, it was palpable. And he's right. The weather was terrible in California. I mean, it was some of the worst weather they've ever had, and nobody cared. I think we were outside having a reception and it rained and nobody cared. They were just so happy to be able to be back together again, see the new technologies that were out there and available, talk about the new science that had come forward. That was most definitely the highlight of the year.
Fantastic. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think on a personal note, and there were a couple of really useful connections that I made at both the San Diego event and in the Brussels event. We're doing some experimental technology development work within AstraZeneca at the moment, and having the ability to go out and meet people and network with them and make the connections that are going to lead to the collaborations that have that will give us the springboards to sort of really drive this technology development platform forwards, I think for me were the real highlights. And then I've seen a lot of stuff around sort of lab of the future, right? And really, again, for me, Brussels was a great opportunity to sit down with some vendors in this sort of space and really start to talk about the practicalities of delivering a more integrated lab solution within AstraZeneca, right? So for me, those were the highlights for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's look at some of the challenges, though, in respect to the sector itself. So looking back, what do you think some of the major challenges were that the sector faced, and what developments stood out for you? John, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, so I think I was a little bit surprised, if I'm honest, with some of the sort of downsizing that went on in parts of the biotech sector, and certainly some of the major farmers have had to think about restructuring, I guess. And some of that, I guess, is probably driven by sort of geopolitical events. Obviously, the sort of stock markets and the inflation situation in response to, as I say, various geopolitical events. And I think that was kind of brought home to me when I was at the conference in Brussels. And before I left, someone came up to me because I've been doing a little bit of mentoring whilst I was there. Some of the early career guys had asked to spend some time with me so we could maybe give them some advice. And I was on the exhibition floor and someone came up to me and said, I've just been told, that my organization is downsizing 50% of its early drug discovery, and I genuinely wasn't expecting that, right? Science contributed enormously during the COVID crisis, right? We reacted, we were there, we were able to carry out research to really drive forwards and the understanding and knowledge about that disease, and bring forward new medicines, and so we were kind of on this sort of like peak, right, of science, right? And science was popular, everybody wanted to be a scientist, and to come off the back of that, and as I say, I found it really humbling in some respects to be stood in that conference surrounded by all those people and have someone who's quite an early career individual asking me that question. I mean, I faced that question in my life, right? My career, I've had to go through reapplying for my job and that sort of thing. I was really surprised, I think, that that at the scale of which some of those biotechs went under, or you know, and some of the bigger pharma companies have been involved in restructuring programs. So that was probably the biggest challenge I thought a lot of people in our industry face. Again, for me, and I'm sure Vicki will touch on this, you know, using the sort of education side of SLAS to be able to ensure not only that I've got a great network, but also that I'm up to date with the latest trends, technologies, and training through the sort of short courses that SLAS provide, I think is something that's going to be really key in terms of supporting our community in a time when there may be changing employment landscapes out there.
Right. And in terms of developments in the sector, though, was there anything which stood out? You think, well, this was new and exciting last year. We'll come on to trends for this year, but anything stood out for you?
Yeah, I think again, I went to the AI data analytics conference at the end of last year, the SLAS event in Basel, and I was really taken with actually the breadth of interest in that sector. It's been promising a lot for a long time, right? But I think we're now getting into that delivery phase. We're now starting to see, and I think there were some really elegant examples where AI and big data analytics had a significant impact on real drug discovery projects, right? And that absolutely impacts patients. It's not just a concept. Yeah, if we do it this way, we can get a drug to market faster. These were real examples of clinical data sets that were being analyzed that were making a real difference in drug discovery. And so for me, you know, to counterbalance the negatives, right? I think that was a really great positive and a great way to sort of chase out the year in that sense.
Fine. And Vicki, from your perspective, what were some of the big challenges you think the industry faced last year? And again, what do you think some of the big developments were?
Yeah, I agree with John. I really see it as a leveling off that took place in 2023, both in, you know, on the pharma side as well as in the technology provider side. Both of those sectors had explosive growth in 21 and 22 because they had to. That's how we were able to respond to COVID. And what's happened in 2023 is the demand is not the same as it was when we were in the middle of a pandemic and we were looking towards these sectors to help solve a problem. So there has been a leveling off. I would not characterize it as a real downturn. I think it's just kind of getting things back to a more normal level of production and of capacity. And like I said, I'm hearing that. I've heard that from many of the big pharmas. I've also heard it from many of the laboratory automation equipment providers who are seeing that same thing happen for them. And that's fine because, you know, I mean, every bubble bursts. You just don't want it to be explosive. You want that to be kind of a gentle down back to earth where you should be.
Right. And what about in terms of development zone in the sector?
So I agree. Again, I agree with John. The data science space is the place where we are seeing the biggest and the most interesting developments happening. John also talked about Lab of the Future, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but I can tell you that SLAS is looking at this, is putting plans together. And you are going to see some efforts from us in that space as well that will merge that data science management, integration, and helping labs to make sure that they are operating as efficiently and effectively as they possibly can.
Right, great. Now, I'm going to ask you one question, both of you. And now you don't have to answer this, but when I did this last year, not everybody answered this particular question because they said, well, actually, I don't think there is anything. But looking back on last year, is there any areas that you think that the industry could have improved on in the way it handled certain situations or challenges?
So I think for me, I think one of the things we could do better is actually moving the needle on that in that Lab of the Future piece. I personally don't think it's moving fast enough. the big pressure from a pharma perspective is around the things you were just talking about there. Efficiency, right? Speed to delivery, speed of getting drugs to the marketplace, right?
Sure.
And I think the industry needs to really embrace those sorts of technological changes. And I think what we're seeing is people moving along that pathway slowly, almost like it's kind of like an evolutionary thing. But evolution kind of moves really slowly. And for me, I think there needs to be a little bit more revolution in that space. So I think we've got a great opportunity to really grasp the metal here and just say, right, actually, we're going to, you know, really focus on driving that kind of change. Yeah.
Right. Well, can I just come back to you on that just for a second, though, because I've interviewed a lot of people over the last few years during the pandemic and since, talking about digitalization, lab of the future, etc. And there are so many events out there already offering that. And a lot of have said, obviously, that the pandemic accelerated a lot of that in terms of digital transformation and the lab of the future, because pharma companies had to be less conservative, if you like, in terms of how they approached it. But you're saying that they're still quite slow in how they are dealing with that, or your perception is?
Yeah. So I think you're right, and I think this really comes down to the drivers, right? When you have a huge driving pressure, like something, you know, like a global pandemic, right? Suddenly, it really focuses the mind, and people go, right, how are we going to do this?
Sure.
And I think so I see that as the start, you know, almost trying to overcome the inertia, because
Sure.
it's not cheap to do. It's going to be expensive, right?
Sure.
And you know, the cost to change is going to be quite large. But I think the benefits that you get, right? If you could take 30, 40, 50% off the time to market for a molecule, right? Or for a new therapeutic to get to market, that's a huge potential benefit for the company that provides that, but also for the patient population, right? For the people who are potentially suffering from those diseases. That's a huge benefit. And I think, again, reflecting a little bit on Vicki's point, you know, there is a correction, almost a contraction, a kind of like oh, that's, yeah, we're through that now. We'll go back to doing things the way we've done them before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not talking about a niche change in a small part of your business. You're talking about a global change. So, and I think it's, I say, my personal opinion is that a lot of that is going to be dependent on the driver for change.
Mm-hmm.
And once you take the pressure off, there's a risk that you kind of drop back into that. Oh yeah, but this is actually the way we're going to carry on doing things.
Oh, fair point. So, Vicki, anything to add to that? And have you got any thoughts in terms of how the industry could improve, or is it perfect?
I think there's always room for improvement, and I think John hit the nail on the head. I don't really have much to add to it. You know, it is part of this leveling off. It is part of us getting back to a place where we're operating at a normal speed, I guess, is the way to think of it. And in that, companies now have the opportunity to take that breath out and say, okay, so we acquired all of this equipment and all of these people in the middle of this massive pandemic. Now let's take a look at how we use this better, and maybe how we use those people better. And I think that is where we're going to see this industry and these sectors going in the future.
Great, fantastic. All right, well, now let's look ahead to this year. But we're going to start big picture first. So, what are some of your predictions then for life science, biopharma, and pharma for 2024? Big picture. What do you think we can expect to see in the coming 12 months? Who wants to kick off? Vicki?
I'll leave that one for John. He's living it and breathing it.
So I think what you have to realize is that a year in pharma isn't really a very long time, right? When you think about how long it takes to go, you know, to get a project from, you know, up off the ground and running through to some sort of clinical candidate, I think, you know, a year is a pretty short time. You know, I'm very positive about the direction of travel, as we've already said. I think that the lab of the future stuff, you know, the focus will be on efficiencies and productivity, which is absolutely where they should be. I'm also really impressed by the number of people and organizations you hear talking about sustainability objectives as well, right? Our CEO's on record, I think, is, I'm going to paraphrase him, I guess. There's no point in having fantastic drugs in 50 years time if there's no planet, right? You just go, yeah. I mean, you have to have
Can't argue
somewhere
with
to,
that.
yeah, exactly. You
Yeah.
got to have somewhere to live, right? Or so sustainability is absolutely a huge challenge, and I can see it's really refreshing to hear senior leaders talking about those things now in real terms, and they're really looking to make a difference and bring it as part of their core strategy to say, actually, yes, we need to be sustainable. And there's a lot that can be done from a sustainability perspective in the chemistry space, as well as in the biology space. And again, organizations like SLAS are absolutely there to provide forums and discussion places where people can come along and talk about and share their experiences and articulate their values in this space and really learn from each other at how we can do science better, not just for the patients but also for the planet.
Fantastic. Vicki, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I am going to say that, AstraZeneca really is taking a leadership position in the sustainability discussion. And so SLAS is responding and ready to be that resource. So we are creating those forums where people can talk about the challenges that they're having around sustainability in the lab. And we are also taking a look at our own events and making sure that we make them more sustainable, providing resources and information back to those attendees so that they have a real picture of the kind of carbon footprint that they might be putting out by attending our events and how we are scaling that back. So you're going to see some of that at SLAS 2024. If you are attending, keep an eye out for that. If you haven't registered yet, you're going to want to do that soon because it's right around the corner.
Yeah, and the link for that is above this video, viewers, so you don't miss it. Now, let's talk about lab automation and that particular sector, though. So what do you see happening within that space? We obviously touched on AI and data sets and so on, and the lab of the future. But how do you see, what do you see some of the key trends in lab automation in the coming months?
I really do see that integration being a big factor.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's probably the biggest growth space in automation right now.
Right. Yeah. We historically we've very much focused on applying automation at the assembly phase, right? Yep. So I've got the reagents and I really want to assemble the assay and then I want to read the assay. So it's been very focused in that space. I think what we're seeing now is a real drive to go, well, okay, well, how do I prepare the reagents that go into that process, right? In other industries, they sometimes refer to it as kitting. How do you bring the resources into that automation envelope in order to deliver the data? Right. And that's a whole different type of automation. And then when you step beyond that, again, you start thinking about how do I automate the data analytics, the data flow through that. And I think you need all of those components to come together. And as I say, just again, to reiterate, there's going to be a fabulous opportunity to meet all of the vendors who are the key vendors in this space at the conference in Boston in a couple of weeks' time. And it's just a perfect opportunity to start thinking about how to drive some of those changes and make some of those things happen moving forwards.
Great. Now I'm going to ask you one question though before we move on to my final question about working with SLAS. Is that you talked about lab integration, but for viewers watching this now, what do you actually mean by lab integration?
So for me, it's very much about taking a much more holistic view, right? So let's say I've got 3 or 4 standalone automation systems, right? They need to be serviced traditionally by people. So people bring the reagents, they bring the plasticware, they run the experiment on the islands of automation. So the next logical step is to say, well, actually, how do I get other automation systems to feed into that, right? Because that's what stops me from operating in those darker hours. And when you think about it, between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., the laboratories are full of people. They're moving stuff around, they're carrying out assays, right? And then from 6 p.m. 8 a.m. the following morning, the dark hours as we refer to them, right? There's nobody there. So all of your assets are sitting there doing nothing, right? It's not a great investment. So the thing that stops you is, how do I get my reagent out of a -80 freezer, dilute it to the right concentration to add it to the plate that's got my compounds in? How do I get my compounds from compound management stores into that automation system at, say, 2 o'clock in the morning when I don't have people around? How do I get the cells that I need into an assay that's got to start at, say, 4 a.m., right? Because I've got nobody there to do the tissue culture. That's got to be an autonomous mobile robotic solution, or maybe it's a track solution, right? But those are for me, that's the practicality of it. And then, as I say, you layer over the top of that, how do I get the information to flow through my system, right? Because the compound management data store will have the data associated with the compounds I'm testing, but it has to get into and be merged with the output data, right? How do I get that into the corporate database? How do I get that into the bio-ELN, right? The sort of, how do I then start that whole cycle again about which samples am I going to test next? I don't want to wait for a chemist or a biologist to tell me, right? That's where I deploy AI. AI goes, right, having seen today's data, I now think you want to test these samples, right? Or maybe the compounds or samples that I've tested today have reached a certain level of efficacy or potency in my assays, and that should automatically trigger the next stage in the process, right? It should push them into the next set of assays that need to be run. Don't wait for someone to turn up at 9 o'clock in the morning to go, that's what you need to do. And for me, that's this whole lab of the future. It's the whole integration piece. And that should not be perceived as a threat to the scientists, right? Because what we're looking there is we're trying to build an environment to support the science. And as a scientist, right, I'm still hugely valuable to that process. Someone has to think about the hypothesis that needs to be tested. Someone has to think about, is this the right target for this disease, right? Those are things that the human brain is really, really good at. And actually, that's the skill set that we are training our postdoctoral fellows, Ph.D. students, right? That's the value that they bring, not how do I move a material from A to B, right? So for me, that's where I think, we really have an opportunity to step up, to make significant changes and improvements in productivity that can lead to a paradigm shift in the way that we do drug discovery.
Thanks for sharing that, John. Vicki, anything to add?
No.
Right, okay.
Was spectacular. John hit it right on the head.
Fantastic. Well, look, let's lead on to my last question then, which is, and Vicki, you're going to lead off on this one, because it's all about SLAS and what can we expect from SLAS in 2024?
Well, as I mentioned, SLAS2024 International Conference is happening in just a few short weeks in Boston again. We are so excited to be going back to Boston in a non-pandemic environment. The weather will be just fine. Don't worry about it. But really and truly, this is looking to be, again, one of the best conferences we've ever put on. Our exhibit hall is sold out, and we have an even bigger exhibit hall than we've had previously. Then, of course, our Europe conference will take place in Barcelona in May. And then our symposia program continues throughout the year. We will be doing our building biology in 3D at the Scripps Research Institute in Jupiter, Florida. And that's in April. And then we'll be holding 3 symposia in the fall. We'll be doing sample management at Evotech in Toulouse. Our microscale in life science is going to be in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and no, that's wrong. Cambridge, UK, and the AI Data Science Management Symposia will be in Cambridge, Massachusetts. New Cambridge, as we like to call it. So, and then, of course, we always have our 2 journals that are running year-round. Those journals are now open access. So if there is something in those journals you're interested in or you're hearing about, anybody can access those journals, and we strongly encourage anyone to submit abstracts. You can go to the journal's website. It's SLAS Discovery or SLAS Technology to get those schedules.
Fantastic. John, do you want to add anything?
So I'll just add the thing that, aside from the science, which obviously is always outstanding, the thing that I am most impressed by from an SLAS perspective is just the sheer level of professionalism from and production that goes into the events. And I know Vicki's far too modest to mention that, but she has an exceptional team of people supporting her in terms of her leadership team and literally everybody in the SLAS office. I have never worked with an organization that has had quite that level of professionalism, and it makes it easy for somebody who's going to the conference to really enjoy the experience, because you know that everything is going to be, they're going to have thought of everything up front. Everything's going to be there exactly where it's supposed to be, and it will run absolutely like clockwork. So for me, as I say, that's the other than the science, that's the thing I'm looking forward to most, I guess. Yeah, about Boston.
Great.
Well, thank you, John.
There you go. Any last words from either of you before we wrap up? Vicki?
Just that we are looking forward to seeing everybody in Boston, Barcelona, or any of the other places we're at. If you ever need anything from SLAS and you're not finding it on our website, please do not hesitate to reach out. John is right. I have an amazing professional team who are ready, willing, able to help you with anything. And we have a lot of resources outside of events. So please do check those out.
John?
No, just to reiterate what Vicki says, take the opportunity. I would love to meet people. So if you're at the conference and you've seen this and you want to come up and say hi, please just come and stop, and we'll talk about science. Yeah,
fantastic. Great. Well, look, I look forward to seeing you both in person in Boston in the not too distant future. So there you go, viewers. You've heard Vicki and John talk about their challenges from last year and what they think some of the trends will be coming this year. If you've got any views or any comments on what they've said, feel free to put them in the comments below the video. If you'd like to learn more about SLAS, then please go and check out the links above the video, and obviously register for the Boston event if you haven't done so yet. And all that's left me to say is, Vicki, it's lovely to see you again. Happy build up. John, congratulations on the presidency. I knew I was going to get that wrong, but I hope you have a great year. And I look forward to seeing you both in person, as I said, not too distant future. There you go, viewers. I hope you found that interesting. I certainly did. I look forward to hopefully seeing you in person, maybe in Boston in a few weeks' time. Until then, stay well and stay safe. And for everybody, have a wonderful 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Rizwan.
Thank you.